We can't have wrestling be all about the bad guys, the heels, the connivery, the shenanigans, the chicanery, without having a good guy or somebody to oppose the opposition. But sometimes the good guys don't work out. Well, today we got a video that is wrestling's worst good guys. If you guys would like to check out the original upload of the content, click the top link in the description. If you want to hang out with me and the flock live on Twitch, click the bottom link. I've got a free Patreon with bonus content that I can't upload to YouTube because it's too spicy. Yup, that's right. If you want to have that spicy content, go ahead and click Patreon. That being said, let's get right into the video.
If there's one thing in wrestling that's worse than a failed heel turn, it's a failed babyface turn. After all, even if you don't like how a shifting to the side of the villains played out for your favorite wrestler, you can at least boo the booking. But if it's the same but flipped to the hero's side though, there's very little to cheer for. But what are the biggest examples of failed face turns in wrestling history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And where better to start than with the time the Honky Tonk Man was first brought into WWF in 1986 and immediately portrayed as Hulk Hogan's new best friend. Why was this one such a failure? Well, despite WWE's belief that no one would want to boo an Elvis impersonator on account of the King being so beloved by fans all around the world, this didn't turn out to be the case. No, instead, both live crowds and audiences watching at home took one look at Wayne Ferris and his budget Viva Las Vegas gear and promptly decided they hated him. But then, why wouldn't?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. The Honky Tonk Man never did it for me. This would come across as like a meme wrestler for me. I would not want to see anything that he got going.
They? After all, if you've ever seen any of the Tennessee native's shoot interviews, then you'll be all too aware he's a natural heel, someone who finds it easy to get people to dislike him. So once the boss met him during the mid-80s and decided to bring him into the fold then, you'd think he would have realized a heel run straight out of the gate was the obvious way to go. Of course, that's not the way things played out though. No, instead, the Honky Tonk Man tried to get himself over with fans by aligning himself with Hulk Hogan, with the Hulkster even going as far as to endorse the future Intercontinental Champion on screen here. And that only made matters all the worse then, because seeing through this attempt and realizing it was doing nothing except make Hogan look bad, audiences rejected the whole thing and began booing Ferris en masse whenever he appeared in the ring. So quickly pivoting, WWE quickly decided to go with the flow and turn the newcomer heel at this point, with this being the role he remained in for the rest of his run with the company. And it's just as well he did, because now with him wanting fans to jeer him, he was able to be a hugely effective heel, so much so that he'd eventually go on to hold the record for the longest IC title reign ever. That was up until 2023 when the mighty Gunther, one of the best wrestlers on the planet today, symbolically destroyed that record with a stiff chop. Yes, sometimes you have to be able to see when something's just not working, and pivot if you want to rescue a character before too much damage can be done.
Does that kind of line up with what's going on? Never mind. Follow the other Cratewraith 10, we'll put the wrestling shit there.
Hell, it's not like this is the only time such a thing has happened in WWE, as almost 3 decades later in 2014, the same thing would occur with Batista. Now, having Dave Batista return to WWE at that point as a babyface after years of having been away, building up his name in Hollywood, wasn't necessarily a bad idea on the face of things. After all, everyone loved the animal. The only problem with this one, though, was the timing of it, as it was right at the peak of the Yes movement. So, when it was announced ahead of time that Big Dave would be coming back at that year's Royal Rumble then, fans immediately figured out what was going on, and that was that he was going to win this match, and from there, main event WrestleMania 30. Of course, if he was going to win, it meant Daniel Bryan wasn't. And in 2014, anything less than the Washington native going straight to the top of the biggest show of the year was unacceptable. Let's not forget just how beloved the American Dragon was by fans back then, and how much they were willing to hijack shows at every turn in order to let the company know they wanted him to be their guy. So because of this, when Batista came out at that year's Rumble match, the crowd in attendance turned on him before he even got a chance to get in the ring. And the situation only got worse from there when number 30 was revealed and everyone realized it wasn't Daniel Bryan. Still, it was too late to change things now, so Big Dave ended up picking up the win as per the plan and booked his spot in the main event of WrestleMania a few months later. That said, with management by now realizing they couldn't have the animal go into this show as a babyface, they were forced to turn him heel on an episode of SmackDown soon thereafter, and retcon the whole thing so that the second most famous resident of Aberdeen, Washington, could get his well-deserved moment in the sun as the babyface instead. But Batista isn't the only former Evolution member who wrestled the future Blackpool Combat Club member on that night who had a failed babyface run during their career. As a full decade prior to this, in 2004, it was Randy Orton who was failing to get over as a good guy. Of course, like with the Honky Tonk Man, this
They were
one
trying to do a
shouldn't have
Randy
come
Orton
as much of a
face turn in
surprise because, at least
2004?
at this point in his life, Randy
That
Orton
is
had a
sin.
reputation for being such a jerk, it was impossible not to dislike him. And sure, he would by all accounts grow up over the years which followed and become a better person as a result, meaning that people generally have no issue cheering for him today. But back then, this certainly wasn't the case. So when WWE decided to try to push him as their next top babyface star following his exit from Evolution,
Yeah,
it didn't
he
really
definitely
go to
looked
plan
like
in
a
the way they'd
douchebag
hoped it
back then.
might. That said, it might still have been able to be salvaged if Orton was portrayed as a more of a Stone Cold Steve Austin-esque anti-hero doing his best to keep hold of the World Heavyweight title he just won from wrestling's own version of He Who Shall Not Be Named. In the end, though, any hopes of him being a badass fighting champion who didn't care what fans thought were washed away when, only 1 month after winning the belt, he dropped it to Triple H, ending his reign in the limpest way possible. Yes, by that
Damn.
point, it was becoming apparent the only reason the Viper had won the gold at all was so that he could break Brock Lesnar's record as the youngest world champion in company history, and not because Vince McMahon was ready to fully pull the trigger on him as being the new face of WWE as so many had assumed. And because of this then, it would take Orton a while to fully get back to the point he should have been at all along, with it really being his bout against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 21 which finally solidified him as a brash heel main eventer. So good would he be in this role, in fact, he'd eventually pick up 2 underlings of his own, who he could mold into his own image, with these people being none other than Cody Rhodes, and our next subject, Ted DiBiase Jr.
Cody
Why
though.
is Ted
I like
DiBiase
Cody
Jr.
though.
in our video about the worst babyface turns in WWE history? Does anyone remember the DiBiase posse? That's right. After failing to really make much of an impact as a heel during his first couple of years with the company during the late 2000s, the decision was made to try to get the son of the $1 Million Man over as a babyface by having him portray a brand new frat boy type character. Yes, for Vince McMahon to decide the best way to get someone over who was already disliked by the crowd was to have him start hosting tailgate parties every week was a sign that maybe he was out of touch with fans at the time. Of course, it should go without saying
What the
that
hell?
this gimmick failed to get over, and so it
Yeah, I
wasn't
wanna
long
do that
before
shit.
Ted DiBiase Jr. found himself stuck back in the lower mid-card, taking on the likes of Unico and Michael Genesis of McGillicuddy. And come the spring of 2013, even those days would be over, as he'd leave WWE altogether. Could it have been different for him? Maybe.
Oh, he got
But then
fluffy.
he was never really over enough for WWE to try a second time, so we'll never know for sure. Still, it could have been worse. It could have ended up like the absolute career killer that was Alberto Del Rio's completely unwanted babyface run in 2013. Now you're probably noticing something of a pattern by this
Babyface Del
point in the
Rio
video.
sounds
And that
crazy.
pattern is that there are certain people who are just natural heels, and so they should always play this role on screen. After all, there's a reason you rarely see actors such as Ralph Fiennes or John Malkovich play heroes in their movies. And when it comes to wrestling, Alberto Del Rio is someone who has never really took naturally to being on the side of the good guys, which is probably the reason why it failed so spectacularly when WWE tried to make this a thing towards the middle of the 2010s. And as if that isn't reason enough, it certainly didn't help his case in getting over with fans as a babyface
Yeah, like,
back in 2013.
I hate when it comes across like super duper like weird and odd. Like the person is like struggling to play the character. Like don't make it just be like the complete opposition to how they fucking are, dude. Like let that motherfucker be a slimy dickhead if he has to be. Don't make him be out here with the suffering succotash. I do declare, I declare.
13, as this was the point Vince McMahon for some reason chose to make one of his chief rivals the incredibly over Dolph Ziggler. Seriously, if there was 1 year you didn't want to try to get a relatively new good guy over by having him square off against the show-off, then this was the one, as Dolph was arguably at the peak of his popularity at this point. Hell, when his music hit on the Raw after WrestleMania 29 to announce he was coming to cash in his Money in the Bank contract on Del Rio, it got one of the biggest pops of the modern era. So why were WWE insistent on still trying to get the Mexico native over as the face in this situation back then? Well, the answer to that is partly that they were looking to create a new top Latino star, one who could help them draw bigger audiences in more Hispanic-dense markets. It's just a shame then that Alberto Del Rio was no Rey Mysterio when it came to getting fans on his side. No, he was quite the opposite in fact, which was exactly why a couple of months after losing his World Heavyweight title to Dolph, he turned heel again and set everything right with his path going forward. Well, sort of. Because as it turns out, this failed face turn did so much damage to his momentum, come 2014, he'd be out of the company entirely, and would only return briefly in late 2015 before being released all over again. Yes, because of how poorly the whole period was received for Del Rio, there was simply no place for him in WWE anymore heading into the latter half of the 2010s. But fear not, WWE would have no problem replacing his terrible face turn with another one, as in 2017, they'd call top NXT heel Bobby Roode up to the main roster and have him play the role of bland, flavorless good guy instead. Obviously then, the reason this one failed was because fans were already happy seeing Roode play the villain. Hell, it was this exact character which had gotten him so over during his time in the Black and Gold brand that he'd become NXT World Champion before his time there was up.
Damn.
But this was also the point where NXT and the main roster had their biggest disconnect, as while fans were generally into what Triple H was doing down in Florida, Vince McMahon couldn't get behind it unless he was allowed to put his own personal stamp on things. And that was why so many call-ups around this time failed, as the boss had to mess with a winning formula so that he could say it was his own creation. Need any evidence of this?
But it was it's so silly to me to... Why fuck with what's working, Vince? Why treat it like it's not even Ken down there? Like, what are you doing? You got stars coming through pre-built, pre-over. They're already over with the section of the audience that's watching them. I hate that. That disconnect is so...
This being the case, just look at the way he massacred our boys Adrian Neville, Keith Lee, and Ricochet when they were brought up to either Raw or SmackDown. That said, these failures are arguably minor when compared to the way Bobby Roode was treated when he joined SmackDown in August of 2017, as all that had to be done was literally transport his heel character, complete with glorious heel theme music, up to Thursday nights and let it play itself out there. But instead, Vince McMahon decided what Roode needed was to be a babyface instead, and this instantly killed any momentum he'd been building up stone dead, bad enough to the point that he'd never even sniffed the main event scene on the main roster, and would instead spend the majority of his time in either the go-nowhere tag team division or fighting for the likes of the then pretty worthless United States title. That's right, by the time the 2010s were reaching their last few years, it was becoming increasingly clear the boss had no idea what his audience wanted anymore, and so could not book characters they were happy watching on a weekly basis. And if you need any further evidence that this was the case, you only have to look to his insistence on having Charlotte Flair be a babyface in 2018. Now, we're not here to take any shots at Charlotte Flair as a person. Hell, by all accounts, she's a very nice woman, and it's clear she's a total pro when it comes to her in-ring work. That said, given the fact she's pretty much the poster girl for being a natural heel in WWE, with many fans feeling her family name has certainly helped her get to the top. Of course, she's worked hard to get to her spot, and is a tremendous talent, but this doesn't stop a portion of the fan base feeling this way. And this has led to situations where she has been awkwardly inserted into WrestleMania main events, despite not really having any business being there. Basically all this is to say it's very easy to boo Charlotte as a character, too easy in fact, which is why the idea of her being a babyface for any length of time seems so stupid. But as the 2010s were drawing to a close, Vince McMahon was insistent on making sure the Queen was the women's division's version of Roman Reigns.
They gotta find a way to really do it, though.
In the lead up to that year's
He gotta save somebody.
Despite the fact the only person fans wanted to cheer here was Becky Lynch. Hell, the very way Charlotte wrangled her way into turning Becky's SmackDown Women's title shot against Carmella into a triple threat was so heelish in its nature, it's truly baffling anyone in WWE thought this was how a babyface would act in 2018. But that certainly seemed to be the story they were trying to tell at this point, as after Becky decided she'd had enough of her so-called friend usurping her at every opportunity, and so turned on the Queen, the Man was very much sold to fans as the bitter villain in this scenario. Well, at least initially she was, because someone apparently explained to the WWE booking team that stepping over your friends at the last minute in order to steal their title shot is not, in fact, the action of a noble hero. They pivoted and had Becky be portrayed as the badass anti-hero, all while Charlotte gradually slipped more and more into the heeldom she was better at portraying all along.
Charlotte just had the whole day like, oof.
They never made another mistake when it came to the heel-face dynamics of anyone else on the women's roster. Except for the time they did in 2022 with Lacey Evans, of course. Really, the issue here wasn't that fans weren't necessarily willing to cheer Lacey.
Lacey was such a funny heel
the story
character.
Of her being a military veteran, it would have been very easy for crowds to get behind her. The only problem was that by the time all was said and done with this storyline, they were so confused that they couldn't even tell which side the Georgia native was supposed to be on anymore, and so they didn't know how to react. Yes, while it initially seemed like Vince McMahon was setting Lacey Evans up to be a big-time babyface when her past history was revealed to fans, that would all be washed away when a few weeks later, she was drafted over to Raw, and there, inexplicably portrayed as a heel once more. And to make matters even more confusing, less than a month after this, in June of 2022, things changed all over again when she was moved back to SmackDown and switched over to the side of the good guys for the second time in as many months. But that still wasn't the end of things, as almost immediately after this, in July of the same year, she turned heel again when she laid out Aaliyah. Why had she done this? To be honest, we're not sure we could tell you, because things had gotten so needlessly convoluted by this point, we're not even sure the WWE had a decent explanation anymore.
Dressed like Sonya Blade.
Evans certainly didn't know either, which was why her frustration with the company continued to grow to the point that by August of
That was a little fucked up. That was a little fucked up, Lacey. Yeah, that was mean. Let me say that was exceptionally mean. If you saw what I saw, I mean, Flair was kind of crazy. I'm not gonna go into detail as to why that was beat, but oof.
certainly didn't know either, which was why her frustration with the company continued to grow to the point that by August of 2023, when her contract came up, she'd choose not to renew it, with her instead now choosing to follow in the footsteps of Mandy Rose by making a small fortune releasing her own pay-per-view content online. Will the same thing happen with our next subject? It's unlikely, as her MMA career has seen her accrue more money than she likely knows what to do with.
She was like, I ain't wrestling no more, bet. I'm about to show these titties.
Being the second women's star to be a victim of a bad face turn on WWE
See, I try to see some titties.
And again, this wasn't necessarily a terrible idea on the face of things. After all, while the former UFC bantamweight champion was a heel in the lead-up to her three-way main event against Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 35, she was a face when she first joined the company the prior year. So it made sense that once she returned from her time off having a baby,
all two
she'd
titties?
feel fresh all over again, and fans would be ready to cheer for her once more. Unfortunately, though, Ronda didn't feel refreshed at all when she returned. And the reason for this was that she seemed to have lost any of the passion for the ring she had the first time around. On top of that, her promo abilities, something which were never her strong point even as far back as her days in the Octagon, hadn't improved at all, and so whenever she was asked to speak in a babyface manner, it all just sounded really awkward and forced.
She like bashed the business at one point online, and online we will do that. Online would get like all disrespectful about like the fans and all that, but like they just come across like super ungrateful. Just like stay the fuck away then.
Came in with in 2018 was gone, and all that was left was the blandest of all good guys, someone who fans couldn't even
it's a big go fuck yourself stamp on the forehead for me.
And that's why, come the summer of that year, WWE would be forced to change course with the California native when they turned her heel following a loss to Liv Morgan. Sadly though, even that wasn't enough to turn Ronda's fortunes around, as so much damage had her babyface turn done. Even as a heel now, she was no longer over with audiences anymore. So when her contract ran out a year later in 2013, she'd choose not to sign a new one and would instead largely disappear from the wrestling world outside of a couple of random appearances on both the indie circuit and an episode of Ring of Honor.
It's okay if you didn't like your experience with it.
This isn't the biggest example of a
that's
failed
fine.
babyface run in wrestling though.
But
Now,
like,
for that, you could argue we have to go all the way back to 2012.
yeah, like when you do the whole shit is fake anyway. It doesn't matter. It's not a real fight. In a real fight, I'd be chill. Like, shut the fuck up. Hey, shut up forever. Yeah. Get out of here, man. It's weenie shit. Just, I don't know. Cause you know, you knew what you were signing up for. Like, you're playing a character on screen. Some people like you, some people don't. Grow up. Take your paycheck and shut the fuck up. The Miz's face is kinda cursed. That'll make no sense. I want to slap him right now.
As this was the year WWE made the truly baffling decision to have The Miz be portrayed as a hero. Seriously, The Miz seems like a nice guy in real life and all, but there's maybe never been a wrestling character more perfectly suited to being a heel. After all, we are talking about the guy who was
I loved this segment. I love this. My man was going crazy. Daniel Bryan just had the dip, like, ooh. But jeez, if you feel, ooh, it hurts. True verse.
pretty much the poster boy for being a heel. So when Vince McMahon felt the thing to do with the Ohio native back in 2012 was to have him be a guy people could get behind, it went a long way towards showing just how out of touch he'd become. And it also didn't help that this was the period Mike Mizanin took on Ric Flair as a manager in WWE's failed attempt to get some of the Nature Boy's babyface charisma to rub off on the former WWE champion. Really, there was just nothing about The Miz here which would make fans want to get behind him at this time. The only way you would ever have known he was a babyface, in fact, was because commentary was telling you so. Thankfully then, this would be rectified come the summer of 2014, as at this point, Mizanin returned to being a heel, one who was now playing the role of a man who delusionally thought he was a Hollywood A-lister after having starred in WWE Studios films. And after that, the company would never try to turn him again, until they would in 2023, which thankfully has gone a lot better this time around.
Yeah. That man is, he's respected as fuck these days, though. I'll give him that. He definitely clawed his way into being, like, held in high regard, because he was definitely weenie before. But, that was dope. I like that video. If you guys like to support the original creator of the content, go ahead and click that top link in the description. If you want to react to content with us live on Twitch, click the bottom link. This is one of the final videos in the batch of wrestling reactions we're doing on the YouTube channel. If it underperforms, I will be moving on, just letting you guys know. That being said, we'll still be doing all the stuff on Twitch and Patreon for free, so you're not really missing nothing. It's just, Monty gotta pay bills. Crow Monty gotta pay bills. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Don't be weird. Thank you so much to those of you that have made it over to the Patreon. I appreciate you.
I'm still hungry.